Welcome to another video on answer writing program discussion, where we will be discussing 3 questions, 2 static question and 1 current affair questions. First, the static question will be from GS3, disaster management, disaster management, and there will be 1 static question. Now let us see those questions. The very first question we have is on glacial lake outburst flood. We have witnessed in past multiple type of this kind of disaster. So we'll be talking about how they pose threat and what kind of measures we need to take. The second question, which is on disaster resilient infrastructure, we will try to understand what exactly is disaster resilient infrastructure. We'll also understand the role of CDRI. The third question is a current affair based question, which is about nuclear energy and how we need to highlight the need of nuclear energy and understand the challenges associated with the same. So let us start with the very first question. Very first question is, what are glacial lake outburst floods? How do they pose threat to life and property in Himalayan region? Mention the measures to mitigate the effects of such extreme weather events. In this question, in the introduction, you have the option to define what are glacial lake outburst floods. In the body 1, you can talk about what kind of threat they have with respect to life and property, specifically to Himalayan region. And lastly, we will talk about the measures to mitigate the effects of such extreme events. So that's it for question number 1, understanding it. Let us see the introduction. In the introduction, you can define, as in you can talk about what are glacial lake outburst floods. You can talk about they are floods because of certain kind of events where we have seen how glacial lake can melt suddenly and they can breach certain kind of barriers and create flood-like situation for the lower region. Now that is something you can write in the introduction. In the body, you can talk about the threats to life and property in the Himalayan region. We have seen that how Himalayan region is very vulnerable to such kind of glacial lake outburst floods. So we over here, first thing we will understand, because of climate change, the degree of unpredictability has increased, which has definitely augmented the chances of the lake outburst process, and thus it definitely threatens the life and property. Second is unstable moraine and dams. In past, we have seen that how certain kind of structures, they have become unstable either through natural or anthropogenic causes, and we have witnessed one instance, which was Kedarnath flood in 2013. Over here, we witnessed a glacial lake outburst flood, which definitely impacted thousands of lives, killing thousands of people, as well as loss of property was also there. Then it's sudden flood. Now threat to life and property, when we are talking about sudden flood, we do not have even time for preparedness or prevent the same, and thus it has a higher chance of impact and a very potential disaster. It can also lead to other kind of disasters such as landslide, sedimentation, etc. And we have seen how 2014 the Sikkim lake outburst that led to sedimentation, which affected the river flow, which in further affected the hydropower projects that were ahead in the river. So there are multi-dimensional impact on life as well as property in the Himalayan region. Now let's talk about the measures, where the very first thing that you can talk about is guidelines that NDMA releases. It also encompasses multiple measures. The very first is risk zonation, to understand where we have higher potential, higher vulnerability. Second is early warning system. Through early warning system, we can understand and alert the people who are living in the surrounding region so that they can evacuate the space and save their lives. Third is use of technology. When we are talking about use of technology, we are talking about firstly to ensure we are having early warning system kind of technology. Secondly, we are also talking about making sure we are prepared in advance. When we are talking about lake outburst, we are creating certain kind of structures so that whatever kind of threats that we witness, like unstable region, climate change, unpredictability, they can also be eliminated. Third is code for construction activity. Now we have seen that such kind of lake outburst can also happen due to haphazard construction activity, which affects the carrying capacity of the ecosystem of the surrounding region. So there should be proper guidelines for construction on earthquake specifically to ensure certain kind of floods which have also indirect impact with respect to other disasters. Then we have capacity building of the disaster management relief force, as well as capacity building of the local population, local community, to ensure whenever there is a potential for happening of certain kind of disaster like GLOFS, people are ready and they understand what is the standard operating procedure. And the last is channeling potential flood. Now we do understand that certain kind of events, they cannot be, they are inevitable, and thus there should be certain kind of technological infrastructure in place which can channel the flood in such a way that it is not creating a higher impact, a disaster kind of situation. So that is there for the measures. Now, in the conclusion, you have the potential to talk about how government has proactively taken initiatives like comprehensive national GLOF mitigation project, where government is trying to ensure they understand the idea like vulnerability maps and take precautions in advance. So this kind of keywords as well as initiatives can also be written in your conclusion. So that's it for question number 1. Let's see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. In the introduction, you can talk about the definition like glacial lake outburst flow is released of meltwater from moraine or ice dam glacial lake due to dam failure. It often results in hazards like flood downstream, etc. can result to significant loss of life as well as infrastructure. You can talk about how the algorithm works is in sudden release of water, rapid events lasting hours to days, and large downstream river discharge. Then in the thread part, you can list down all the keywords and arguments that we talked about and support the same with examples. In the measures, again, you can talk about different measures, support them with the argument. You can talk about different proof points like guidelines for preparation of disaster management plans, etc. So earthquake resistant building, etc. And in the conclusion, you can talk about how it's very essential to create certain kind of measures, and you can also talk about government initiatives in the same. So that's it for question number 1. Let's move on to question number 2. Question number 2. What do you understand by disaster resilient infrastructure? Mention role of Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure in promoting disaster resilient infrastructure in developing countries. Now this question is very specifically related to disaster resilient infrastructure. So you have the opportunity to write the definition or the idea or the principles of the same in the introduction. Over here, you can talk about how disaster resilient infrastructure refers to infrastructure which are robust in nature and not fragile and can definitely withstand different levels of disaster. Over here in the definition, you can also talk about the principles of resilient infrastructure which have been released by United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction. You can talk about how different principles are in play when we are thinking about disaster resilient infrastructure, like continuous learning to ensure different disasters and their impact on the infrastructure and making sure our future infrastructure are disaster resilient and so on. So you can talk about different principles. You can add a mind map. You do not need to expand the same, right? So this is something you can write in the introduction and cater to the first demand, which is what do you understand by disaster resilient infrastructure. In the second body, you have the option to talk about the role of Coalition for CDRI in promoting disaster resilient infrastructure in developing countries. The very first is developing resilient infrastructure. CDRI, the first mandate is to ensure develop resilient infrastructure in the developing countries, be it on health, education, transportation and telecommunication. Over here we are talking about all kind of social infrastructure to ensure they are prepared for any kind of disaster. The second is capacity building. Over here we are talking about technical assistance, knowledge sharing, training programs to ensure local communities are ready and they are independent in long term. Then we're talking about policy advocacy. Over here we're talking about creation of certain rules, legislations to ensure the disaster resilient infrastructure, they are part of the legal aspect as well. Fourth is financing. Now over here we are talking about mobilization of fund, where different institutions, they release grants as well as funds. Those funds can be used for research and development as well as for development of disaster resilient infrastructure. We will encompass 7 to 8 points in the main body, as this question has only one body demand. Again, we'll talk about technical assistance and innovation, CDRI also helps with respect to the technical assistance to the local community as well as with respect to innovation, research and development. Over here we're talking about knowledge generation, knowledge sharing, and lastly regional and global initiative where alignment with Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction and SDGs is maintained. So this is something you can write in your body of the second question. In the conclusion, you have the option to go ahead and write about way ahead, where you have to give a bigger picture that how disaster resilient infrastructure has to be at multiple levels like asset level, service level, at user level, and all this is a system wide approach to infrastructure resilience. Now these are the kind of data points that you get from the reports of United Nations disaster risk reduction, where we talked about the principle. Similarly, we understand how going ahead our idea for resilient infrastructure should encompass multiple layers and different stakeholders. So that is something you can write in the conclusion of second answer. Now let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. Firstly, in the definition part, you can talk about the infrastructure as in disaster resilient infrastructure, which are designed and constructed and maintained to withstand and recover from impacts of various natural and man-made disaster. You can talk about CDRI as an organization. You can also encompass over here how India was a crucial key member who take the leadership and took initiatives and was part of the creation of CDRI. That is something you can write over here. So in the body part, you can list down different roles of CDRI and give relevant justification for the same. And in the conclusion, you can either talk about how CDRI is very significant for developing countries, or else you can also talk about how system-wide approach is necessary when you're talking about infrastructure resilience. So that is there for question number 2. Let us move on to question number 3. Question number 3. Nuclear energy harnessed from the core of matter holds the power to light up our world for generations to come. In light of the statement, highlight the need of nuclear energy and challenges associated with it. This is a current based question. Recently we witnessed an editorial of the same where we talked about how India needs to go nuclear as an emerging economic country where one expects maximum net growth in energy consumption should see rapid deployment of new nuclear energy capacity to credibly address the climate change challenge at global level. Over here in the introduction, you can either talk about the definition of nuclear energy, you can talk about how nuclear energy is product of fission or fusion of nuclear material. At the same time, you have also option of writing current affairs, that how India's energy scenario is there. Presently, we are only at 2% of nuclear energy in the entire energy matrix, where the energy demand is going to increase. India must diversify its energy needs, and one of the potential way is to go nuclear energy. So that is there in the introduction. Let us see the body part and understand why India's need for nuclear energy. The first is growing energy demand. We have witnessed that we are continuously having higher demand for energy consumption. We have anticipated power demand expansion in the decade will definitely have double the demand right now that we have for the energy because of rapid economic development. So that is something which you can write in the first point. The second point is reducing dependency on fossil fuel. As we are trying to find alternative sources of energy, coal, which is the dominant source of energy in the energy matrix, is something that we are looking to reduce or rely less on it. So nuclear along with renewable can definitely take the place of the same. Third is climate change mitigation. We have been talking about how India is going to reduce the carbon intensity and thus increase its non-fuel fossil fuel based capacity, and nuclear energy definitely becomes a number one candidate over here when you're talking about sustainable energy forms. The next is reliable baseload power. Now, as we have understood that renewable sources do not have certain kind of reliability as they are dependent on natural sources, whereas nuclear energy can provide that kind of reliability. The next is economic development, as we have witnessed that how consumption of energy has been directly correlated with the economic development, thus augmenting our energy capacity through nuclear energy can definitely aid our economic development. And the next is long-term sustainability. We have seen recently how Indian government is pushing for thorium-based nuclear reactors like Bhavni nuclear facility that we have recently heard of. So that is something that you can write in India's need for nuclear energy. Next is challenges associated with the nuclear energy. Now, like every energy form, we also have certain challenges with respect to nuclear energy. The first is safety concern. We have seen multiple disasters in the global level. We have seen Fukushima disaster of nuclear energy where multiple lives were lost. Also, there was impact on environment. So that is something that is of safety concern. We have also seen how in 2026 there was Kakrapur nuclear plant incident. So those kind of incident that definitely affects the idea of safety and issues with related to same. Second is public opposition. The public perception of nuclear energy has been also impacting its expansion, and we have witnessed certain protests against the project like Kundankulam nuclear power plant protest. Third is cost and financing. Unlike renewable energy sources, nuclear energy sources are very cost demanding, and setting up requires certain degree of high level of technology. For the same, financing becomes also very difficult. Next is long gestation period. Now we have understood, as it's very complicated for those technologies to be implemented, we also have long gestation period where the entire process can get delayed. And also nuclear liability, we have also understand the waste that comes out of the nuclear energy plants also becomes kind of a liability with respect to environmental protection and all. So these are the challenges associated with nuclear energy. In the conclusion, you have the option to talk about SDG goal 7, where we talk about affordable and clean energy forms. Over here, you can talk about how nuclear energy can definitely realize our SDG goal 7 and must be inculcated in our energy plans to ensure going ahead we have diversified sustainable sources of energy. So that is there for question number 3. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. Firstly, you can talk about nuclear energy. In the introduction, you can talk about its share in the entire energy matrix. You can talk about what kind of present network we have in India and what kind of energy we are generating from nuclear energy. Next, we talk about the need, where we'll be talking about different points along with the argument and give certain kind of justification through example, right? So you can definitely use this example and proof points for your argument. And next is our challenges associated with the same. Over here again, you can talk about the challenges, give certain kind of substantiation for the challenges and give examples to ensure your answer is very holistic. And in the end, you can talk about how going ahead we have to diversify our energy supplies to ensure India is having net energy security and so on. You can also talk about the SDG goal and so that's it for question number 3. Now, answer writing program, Vajiram and Ravi's initiative, where you are writing answers 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. You will be writing 2 questions on static, for which a schedule is uploaded on the portal, and 1 question on current affairs. It will be covering GS 1 to 4, and also all the questions are discussed on YouTube channel, the video that you are watching right now. You can just go to vajiramis.com. You can see the schedule over here. Go to the respective tab for mains daily answer, then go to the month. You can see all the questions over here. Click on them and you can choose file to upload your answer. Going through all this practice will definitely help with respect to discipline and definitely help you understand the structure of answer writing and so on. So thank you so much and keep writing.